Think Ealing Studios only made comedies? Think again. Before they became famous for witty British humor, Ealing produced some of the grittiest, most innovative war films ever made. We're talking about movies so brutally honest, they shocked audiences during wartime itself. Today we're breaking down extraordinary films from the studio that proved propaganda didn't need to be preachy to be powerful. These aren't heroic fantasy films. These are the authentic, morally complex war stories that changed everything. Went the day well? 1942. Forget cozy English villages. Director Alberto Cavalcanti transforms a peaceful Buckinghamshire town into an absolute nightmare when German paratroopers disguise themselves as friendly soldiers. Based on Graham Greene's short story, this film shattered every expectation audiences had about British filmmaking. What makes it genuinely shocking is the unflinching violence. A woman takes an axe to a Nazi soldier's head. An aristocrat sacrifices herself with a hand grenade. These aren't sanitized moments, but brutal, matter-of-fact acts of wartime desperation. Produced by Michael Balkan, this was Ealing's signal that they weren't playing it safe. The film opens in a predicted future where Britain has won the war and defeated a full invasion, making its propaganda message hopeful rather than terrifying. Critics initially dismissed it, but a 2010 restoration proved Tom Huddleston right when he called it jaw-droppingly subversive. When the film finally arrived in America, 2 years after its British release, viewers couldn't believe what they were seeing. This wasn't Mrs. Miniver. This was something far more dangerous. Thora Hird, in one of her first major roles, became unforgettable simply by refusing to look away from violence. A man escaped. Ealing presentation. Wait, this isn't technically an Ealing production, but it represented the kind of intimate character drama that influenced Ealing's later work. Robert Bresson's masterpiece about French resistance fighter André Devigny inspired Ealing's approach to escape narratives. The film's influence on British war cinema was profound, particularly on how Ealing would eventually handle The Great Escape years later. Director Bresson's minimalist technique showed that war cinema didn't require spectacle. Close-ups of faces, objects acquiring significance through character attention, sound telling stories better than dialogue. These techniques influenced everyone at Ealing. The film demonstrates that escape narratives work best when focused on psychological states rather than action sequences. Fear, hope, desperation become cinematically more interesting than explosions. This philosophical approach to war cinema helped define Ealing's distinctive style. Bresson's influence meant that when Ealing made its own escape films, they would prioritize character over spectacle, psychology over action. A Man Escaped became essential viewing for Ealing filmmakers interested in elevating their material beyond mere entertainment into genuine art. San Demetrio, London, 1943. Picture this. A British oil tanker is set ablaze by the German cruiser Admiral Scheer in the middle of the Atlantic. The crew abandons ship, drifts for 3 days in a lifeboat, and discovers their doomed ship still floating. Instead of giving up, they reboard the burning tanker and fight to bring it home across hundreds of miles of hostile ocean. Charles Friend and Robert Hamer directed what might be the most extraordinary survival story ever committed to film. What separates this from typical propaganda is its absolute lack of sentimentality. These men are hungry, freezing, and terrified. They don't make speeches. They simply do their duty with quiet professionalism. The Merchant Navy suffered higher casualty rates than all 3 armed services combined, yet their story was rarely told in cinema. This film changed that. Young Gordon Jackson appears as the mess boy, a role that would launch a legendary career. The production was an Ealing triumph, mixing tank shots filmed in their water tanks with real naval footage. One crew member, John Boyle, died during the actual salvage but was posthumously honored for his bravery. The film's power lies in showing how ordinary merchant sailors became heroes without ever thinking of themselves as such. When audiences watched this in 1943, they were seeing a genuine celebration of men they knew who worked on ships they'd seen. The film grossed considerably well and proved that audiences wanted truth over sentiment. The Bells Go Down, 1943. When the London Blitz began, the auxiliary fire service faced infernos that made combat seem controllable. Basil Dearden's film follows an ensemble cast through the transformation from peacetime volunteers to wartime heroes. Tommy Trinder, a massive star at the time, plays it straight alongside a young James Mason in a rare straight role. The genius of this production is that it opens as almost comedy, then gradually becomes brutally serious as the German bombing campaign intensifies. The film incorporates actual footage of burning London from the Blitz itself, a stunning choice that grounds everything in documentary reality. The The rivalry between the part-time auxiliary fire service and full-time London Fire Brigade becomes a metaphor for national unity. Finlay Curry plays the gruff district officer with contempt that slowly turns to respect. Mervyn Johns as Sam, a petty dockside thief, provides both comic relief and genuine pathos. The special effects, considering the budget and wartime restrictions, are genuinely impressive. Model work shows fire hoses spraying at massive fires with convincing scale. William Hartnell appears in a supporting role, delivering stoic professionalism. The film was released almost simultaneously with Humphrey Jennings' semi-documentary Fires Were Started, which led to unfavorable comparisons. Yet Dearden's hybrid approach of real actors combined with authentic footage created something unique. For Those in Peril, 1944, Charles Crichton's directorial debut publicized a unit so obscure that most Britons didn't know it existed, the RAF Air Sea Rescue. Pilots who ditched over the English Channel needed salvation. Fast motor launches racing through fog and minefields became their only hope. Ralph Michael plays an RAF pilot who fails combat training and grudgingly joins a rescue launch crew led by David Farrar. The narrative is deliberately slight, allowing the propaganda message to shine through without feeling forced. This was intentional. Ealing understood that audiences didn't need melodrama when the reality was dramatic enough. Crichton recalls his first directorial experience with genuine excitement about racing around the channel in high-speed motorboats. The production involved active military cooperation from the Admiralty and Royal Navy. Real launches, seaplanes, and naval personnel appear in authentic sequences. The film's semi-documentary style became Ealing's signature approach to war storytelling. What distinguishes this from purely propagandistic work is its honesty about failure. Rescue attempts don't always succeed. Men die despite everyone's best efforts. Undercover, 1943, originally titled Chetnik and intended to celebrate Draza Mihailovic's Yugoslav resistance. This film became a casualty of wartime politics. British support for Mihailovic collapsed as Churchill switched allegiance to Tito's communists. Ealing frantically re-edited and retitled the film, deleting specific references while keeping the essential story intact. John Clement stars as a Serbian guerrilla resistance leader modeled on Mihailovic himself. What's remarkable is how much subversive content survived the editing. The Chetnik insignia remains visible. The character names and circumstances perfectly match Mihailovic's biography. Audiences in 1943 understood exactly what they were watching, even if official censors pretended otherwise. Michael Wilding appears as a resistance fighter, while Stanley Baker makes his film debut as a teenage partisan at just 15 years old. Director Sergei Nalbandov, a Russian émigré, brings documentary authenticity to the mountain sequences. Ironically, the film was shot entirely in Wales since actual Yugoslav locations were unavailable. This limitation forced creative choices that ultimately enhanced the film's power. The screenplay by John Dighton would later win Academy recognition for Roman Holiday. Undercover remains an invaluable historical document showing how cinema became a tool of political manipulation. My Learned Friend, 1943. Before Ealing became famous for sophisticated crime comedies like Kind Hearts and Coronets, they made My Learned Friend, a wartime farce that surprisingly works. Will Hay, already in his 50s, plays a scheming solicitor who accidentally becomes entangled in a murder plot. Basil Dearden directed this peculiar hybrid of legal comedy and murder mystery. The genius is that Ealing manages genuine laughs without undercutting the wartime urgency. Claude Hulber and Mervyn Johns provide excellent support in roles that could have been terrible but instead land perfectly. The film demonstrates Ealing's versatility during the war years. While competitors made straightforward dramas, Balkan authorized films that proved audiences needed laughter as desperately as inspiration. Ernest Thesiger brings theatrical menace to his role, creating an unexpectedly complex villain. The screenplay manages satire of British legal procedures while maintaining period-appropriate patriotism. Wartime audiences needed relief from relentless propaganda, and this film provided it without sacrificing sincerity. Its apparent frivolity masks sharp observation of how law and morality can diverge. 9 Men, 1943. Harry Watt directed this ensemble piece following 9 British soldiers isolated in the North African desert, cut off from their unit and surrounded by Germans. What distinguishes 9 Men is its absolute focus on the group dynamic. These aren't heroes, but working men trying to survive impossible circumstances. The film demonstrates Ealing's documentary influence through its emphasis on procedure and routine. How do men allocate water in the desert? How do they maintain discipline when morale collapses? The title itself suggests the democratic nature of their struggle. Jack Lambert, Wally Patch, and Jack Watling lead an ensemble cast that feels genuinely like soldiers rather than actors playing soldiers. The desert cinematography is stunning, shot with an almost painterly quality that contrasts brutally with the men's suffering. Water becomes the film's central obsession, a simple physical need that determines everything. The film never condescends to its audience, never explains what we can infer from observed behavior. This directorial restraint became Ealing's trademark. Harry Watt brought documentary skills developed in the GPO film unit, and his influence elevated the entire production. The film's climax involves no explosions or heroic speeches, just men making impossible choices. 9 men influenced countless war films afterward, proving that intensity doesn't require spectacle. Modern viewers recognize it as precursor to later realist masterpieces. The Halfway House, 1944. Basil Dearden's supernatural mystery brings 10 wartime refugees to a Welsh inn that might not exist. Mervyn Johns and his real-life daughter Glynis Johns lead a cast that includes Françoise Rosé and Tom Walls. The film's brilliance lies in how it addresses collective trauma without being explicitly about the war. These 10 strangers, each carrying their own fears and moral compromises, suddenly confront themselves in an impossible situation. The inn becomes a mirror reflecting their consciences. Is it purgatory? A test? A dream? Dearden refuses to explain, allowing audiences to interpret. The screenplay marked a template for what would become the Ealing comedy tradition, ordinary people confronting extraordinary circumstances. The film's technical sophistication impressed contemporary critics. The production design suggests both authenticity and unreality. Cinematography shifts subtly between naturalism and expressionism. What seems like a modest production reveals itself as remarkably ambitious. Ealing was already experimenting with form during wartime, refusing to be constrained by genre expectations. The performances are universally excellent because Dearden cast genuine actors rather than stars. Everyone becomes equally important. The film's ending, which refuses to resolve its mysteries, challenged audiences accustomed to neat conclusions. The Halfway House demonstrates that Ealing could handle ambiguity and moral complexity during an era demanding certainty. The Big Blockade, 1942. This ensemble film follows the British blockade of Nazi Germany, showing how economic pressure supported military strategy. The title refers to the naval and economic war that strangled German resources. Unlike most war films, The Big Blockade focuses on the invisible struggle rather than combat. Ealing assembled an extraordinary cast including Mervyn Johns, Googie Withers, Robert Morley, and Will Hay. Director Charles Friend structures the film as a series of vignettes, each dramatizing different aspects of the blockade. A German businessman struggles to acquire strategic materials. A neutral country negotiates between opposing powers. A British intelligence officer works behind the scenes. These separate stories eventually interconnect, revealing how the blockade functioned as an invisible weapon. The film is audacious in its scope and ambition. Audiences in 1942 needed to understand that defeating Germany required more than military victory. Economic pressure, intelligence operations, and strategic patience were equally crucial. Ealing made these invisible forces visible through drama. The production design and cinematography create a world of scarcity and tension. Even scenes set in peaceful locations feel claustrophobic because everyone understands the pressure surrounding them. Ships with Wings, 1941. Sergei Nalbandov directed this naval aviation drama featuring real aircraft carrier sequences filmed in cooperation with the Royal Navy. John Clements plays a pilot court-martialed for reckless behavior who gets a chance at redemption. The film's action sequences were genuinely dangerous, with real pilots performing stunts in actual combat conditions. Leslie Banks and Michael Wilding provide strong support as naval officers dealing with questions of discipline and honor. What elevates Ships with Wings beyond routine military propaganda is its focus on moral ambiguity. Clements's character isn't simply a good man falsely accused. He has genuine flaws that led to his court-martial. Redemption requires him acknowledging these failures while proving his worth through action. Director Nalbandov resisted the temptation to make this a simple revenge narrative. Instead, he created complex character drama set against wartime backgrounds. The naval sequences are extraordinarily impressive for 1941. Real ships and planes create authentic scale. The cinematography captures both the beauty and danger of maritime operations. Actors perform alongside actual naval personnel, blurring the line between drama and documentary. The film demonstrates that Ealing understood how authenticity elevated propaganda. The Foreman Went to France, 1942, based on the true story of Melbourne Johns, a Welsh munitions worker who risked everything to rescue vital machinery before the Nazis could seize it. This film proves that ordinary heroes don't need uniforms to be courageous. Clifford Evans plays the titular foreman with a determination that borders on obsession. Tommy Trinder was brought to Ealing as a musical comedy replacement for George Formby, but here he delivers a surprisingly grounded performance as a Cockney soldier. What's revolutionary is how the film depicts working-class Britons as smart, resourceful, and morally superior to the bureaucrats and betters who constantly obstruct them. Director Charles Friend combines documentary-style realism with genuine tension as the team navigates Nazi-occupied France. The supporting cast is extraordinary, including a baby-faced Gordon Jackson in his feature debut and Constance Cummings as an American secretary with brains to match her accent. Filming took 12 months because blitzes repeatedly interrupted production. The result isn't a glorified action film, but a meditation on sacrifice and duty. Winston Churchill's government supported it financially because it perfectly captured the mood of a nation determined to resist while maintaining their humanity. The ending, with a French captain declaring that Britain will never be forgotten, resonated with wartime audiences in ways we can barely comprehend today. Dead of Night, 1945. Ealing's 1945 horror anthology proved the studio could handle genres beyond war dramas and comedies. Directed by Alberto Cavalcanti, Charles Crichton, Basil Dearden, and Robert Hamer, this compendium features 5 tales of the supernatural. The structure itself is brilliant. Individual stories frame a larger narrative about a man experiencing déjà vu while telling his strange dreams to strangers. Each director brings their own visual style to their segment. Cavalcanti's opening ghost story feels genuinely eerie. Crichton's amusing tale about a golfer who wins a bet with the devil shows Ealing's comic timing. Dearden's sequence about a ventriloquist driven mad by his dummy became iconic. Hamer's countryside murder mystery closes the frame. What's remarkable is how these segments cohere into a unified whole despite different directorial approaches. Mervyn Johns carries the narrative as the haunted protagonist. Googie Withers, Michael Redgrave, and Sally Ann Howes provide excellent support. The production design is stunning, creating atmospheric locations that shift between naturalism and nightmare. The film's influence on British horror cinema cannot be overstated. It demonstrated that horror could be intelligent and well-crafted, not just sensational. Audiences found it genuinely disturbing. The circular narrative structure was sophisticated for 1945. The Captive Heart, 1946. Basil Dearden directed this post-war drama about British soldiers in German prisoner-of-war camps, particularly focusing on one soldier's psychological trauma. Douglas Dixon plays a man struggling to maintain his humanity while imprisoned. What distinguishes The Captive Heart is its focus on mental and emotional damage alongside physical suffering. These men aren't just counting days until liberation. They're experiencing psychological destruction that won't end with the camp's closing. Michael Redgrave appears as a particularly complex character dealing with moral ambiguity. Mervyn Johns provides steady support in a role requiring subtle performance. The cinematography creates claustrophobic spaces that express the prisoner's mental states. Ealing refused to glamorize captivity or make it seem somehow noble. Instead, the film shows how imprisonment corrupts and diminishes men. The ending, while providing some resolution, refuses the kind of clean closure that propaganda films typically offered. Several genuine prisoners consulted on production, ensuring authenticity. Dearden's direction brings documentary realism to emotional content. The Cruel Sea, 1953. Wait, this comes after Ealing's war period, but it deserves inclusion because Charles Friend brought everything learned during wartime to this post-war production about the Battle of the Atlantic. Jack Hawkins and Denholm Elliott lead a cast portraying depth-charge crews fighting German U-boats. The film's power comes from showing how repeated danger erodes men's mental states. These sailors aren't fighting single dramatic battles. They're experiencing endless tension across years of convoy duty. The cinematography captures both beauty and terror of the ocean. Production included extensive cooperation with the Royal Navy. Actual escort vessels appear alongside studio reconstructions. The mixing creates seamless authenticity. Friend's direction emphasizes character interaction over spectacle. Sailors become complex individuals with private struggles. One man questions his competence. Another develops relationship problems. A third faces cowardice accusations. These internal conflicts matter as much as the external enemy. The film's success proved that Ealing's wartime documentary approach had permanently influenced British cinema. Post-war filmmakers could no longer make simple propaganda. Audiences demanded psychological complexity and moral ambiguity. The Cruel Sea influenced everything afterward. It represents the culmination of Ealing's war cinema legacy. So there you have it, 18 films that prove Ealing Studios understood something fundamental about wartime cinema. You don't inspire people through lies. You inspire them through truth, presented with artistic skill and emotional honesty. These films aren't quaint historical curiosities. They're vibrant examinations of how ordinary people confronted extraordinary circumstances. Michael Balcon's vision created something genuinely revolutionary. Which Ealing war film shocks you most? Are these understated British productions actually more powerful than the spectacle-driven war movies we make today? And here's the real question that'll spark debate. Why did Ealing abandon these kinds of stories once the war ended? Did peace make us forget how to make genuinely important cinema?